So Heather, I don't know if you have like additional comments around, why, the fabric of neighborhood matters and these trends in terms of numbers. Maybe you're feeling it in Lakeview or other neighborhoods in the city.
Mhm. Yeah, affordability is a big issue here in Chicago. In fact, Mayor Lightfoot formed a housing task force, and just last week they released their high-level report, and a lot needs to be done in Chicago to create more affordable housing options, especially for families. So 13 years ago, to this point, 13 years ago, the city adopted the Affordable Requirements Ordinance, which requires developers to provide affordable units in new developments. And in just 13 years, I'm just reading from the report right now, in the 13 years since the ordinance was adopted, only 1,049 homes were set aside as affordable housing. And usually they're condos within a larger development, and they're typically one bedroom or studio apartments, which doesn't allow for a family to live in, right? So it misses the mark. And the report also states that there is a need the housing gap is nearly 120,000 homes. So this puts large swaths of the city out of reach for many Chicagoans. So I think this is interesting. Affordability is a big, big, complex issue. What you didn't mention in my bio when you were introducing me is that I also ran for Chicago City Council a couple of years ago. Right. So I did not win. But affordable housing was a big, big topic during the campaign, as it should be. Fair and equitable housing, I think, is a basic human right. And if we're not building the housing that will accommodate the people who need it most, then what are we actually doing?
Well,
We're
there's a
doing it to check
balance
a
also,
box.
right?
Yeah.
Because if you
Yeah.
put controls and restrictions on the builders, they're
Right.
not going to build, right?
Right. Exactly.
There's no incentive because it's a
Right.
big risk to build a unit. It's a huge risk, a huge financial risk. And you need to be able to sell or rent the condos.
Right.
You need to have a makeup of residents that gels, right?
Right.
That is, that functions, and everybody needs to pitch in some capacity. Right. So it's a very complex issue. And I think we looked into developing a brief because there are so many, you can't just put in these restrictions, these demand on builders and expect them to build. Right. They're not going to build. I mean, that's what, and same with rent control. They're not going to renovate. No. The buildings are not going to be renovated.
No.
They're not, if there's rent control, as pricing, building maintenance is going up.
Right.
So is how do we, and it's the other piece is also making it, maybe it's about reducing all of the fees that the city, that cities put on to builders, right? To have a property, the taxes, but all of the permitting requirements that add to the construction costs that needs to be recouped some way. I mean, that analysis also needs to be done. And there needs to be, it's a whole other, I think it's an issue that needs to bring a lot of stakeholders at the table to really innovate, to think about it completely differently. And my father was very involved in developing co-ops as a mean of developing affordable housing so that people were owners of the building and the co-op and the cost of the building. That is, one model with its limitations as well. So it's really it's a big issue, but yeah, it is an issue because people leave and then you're left with no residents. So
right. And that's like population loss is an issue in Chicago, and it talks about this later in the brief. And the other thing I think we're about to get to as we continue on is the role of government, which is very important, but also zoning reform is a
Yeah.
great way to make this happen. But, and what you said about out of the box thinking and being innovative, we can't fall into the bucket of like, well, that's the way we've always done it, because the history shows it doesn't work.
Right.
And so how can we create fair and equitable neighborhoods where everyone prospers, and it makes sense for people like developers and others to invest and take the risk? Because you're spot on in what you're saying, and the incentives don't necessarily always come in the form of tax breaks, right? Like there's other ways to incentivize people to build and invest and take the risk, and that's what needs to happen. I love the idea of co-ops. Like that's fantastic. I don't think any co-ops are built in Chicago currently, but
Right. I mean, that is a model. Well,
yeah.
let's go on. I invite you to
Okay.
read the Putting It Into Context, giving
All
a
right.
bit of a history
Sure.
on neighborhoods. Our brief are always include this historical perspective in terms of how do we get there, where it all started, which is always interesting because a lot of times reforms or decisions are made to solve a problem. And if we know that, then we can avoid repeating the problem, later on.